Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with Susie Su, VP of SAP Business Development from Vertex, and excited to discuss with you not only the Technology Insight series with Vertex, but also the Test Suite application and benefits here with Susie. And so I would love to introduce her and have her speak not only on again, just some of the general trends that we are seeing across the global tax management solution landscape, but how that reflects in testing and automated testing. And again, I will introduce data that will supplement some of the conversation, but I'm excited to introduce Susie Su to the conversation. Welcome.
Very good. Thanks, Ogo. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Yes, knee deep in testing, actually.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because with our community, one of the biggest issues is testing of new processes and how that can provide visibility into specifically tax automation processes. And so, I guess why don't we start with how you got here, right? I think it's important for our community to understand your background. How you became a part of the Vertex team, and then from there we can pivot into Test Suite and understanding better that application.
Yeah, very good. Yes, my journey started back in the mid-90s. I started working for PricewaterhouseCoopers in their state and local tax practice. And when I joined that practice, very soon I went into their automation practice. And basically what we did was we implemented tax engines for large companies. The bulk of our customers were SAP customers. And so as part of that, learned very early on how complex it was to implement tax systems in an SAP environment, and learned a lot about testing. And so for the last 25 years, have been helping companies implement testing. About 10 years after I was at PwC, I started a company called LCR Dixon with an SAP developer. His name's Jeff Bleacher. And the two of us figured out that, it made sense for SAP customers, instead of us custom building applications for them and, putting ABAP customizations in their environments, it made sense to pre-develop the programs that met most of their requirements. And we found that there are a number of gaps where tax teams, master data teams, order to cash, procure-to-pay teams, they needed some customization, some level of enhancement done on the SAP side in order to meet all their requirements in the entire the tax flow. And so we started LCR Dixon developing reporting programs, tax adjustment programs, AP automation programs in order to really facilitate end-to-end tax automation. And as part of that, Test Suite came about. And last year we were acquired by Vertex. So we're very excited to be part of the Vertex team. And so now we're launching Test Suite. So we're very, very excited about that. And what Test Suite does is it solves one of the big problems we found around testing, and that is that it's highly manual, it's very complex, and most companies simply don't get around to testing all the scenarios that they want to because of the amount of effort that goes into testing.
Interesting. Thank you for that. It seems like manual testing has been a challenge for many organizations in terms of how they're able to allocate their resources. And when I think about the just overall global tax management landscape, it seems like the complexity has been increasing. So can you talk about how the inability to automate your testing in this current landscape is increasingly become a challenge for organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see certainly from a landscape perspective, more and more companies are going for global tax applications and a single or a universal approach for how they're going to automate their indirect taxes. Instead of having one part of it, using one application, one native SAP, they're going to, external engines that also have SAP capabilities. So that's one thing we're seeing landscape-wise. What that does, of course, we're seeing it on a more global scale is the VAT, GST requirements for companies are becoming more and more stringent. Footprints are increasing. And of course, for companies on any kind of global scale, indirect tax requirements are very complex. And so naturally, implementing solutions that automate that, as well as testing all those variables, becomes very complex and very time consuming.
Yeah, we see that in the data where we, in the trends in tax research report, we saw that really our members were really interested in applications and processes that could limit their manually intensive processes, and manual testing is one of those. And again, the ability to reallocate or take resources and shift it from IT to more SMEs is a big priority for our community. And can you talk about, again, how automated testing really supports that functionality and that ability?
Yeah, sure. So when we looked around at automated testing and what we see out in the marketplace, we see a number of tools that automate maybe one part of the testing cycle, the execution of the documents, for example. But for our clients, particularly those in the tax space, they needed more than that, because there was a lot that happens upstream prior to the creation of those test documents. And that is the building of the test cases, the finding of the data to meet the test criteria, and making sure that that data is available within the SAP environment is where we saw a lot of companies struggling. So we decided that with Test Suite, it made sense to take our automation upstream to the point of the test doc, or rather the test script development. That's where we saw a lot of the gaps, because we see a lot of our tax teams, they need to test every variable, not just, one product and one service in every country. They need to test many more variables across, different countries, across different states, across different provinces, different combinations of products and services, different ship from, ship to locations, vendors, customers. A lot of variables have to be tested. And a lot of times the tax team, who were maybe relying on their procure-to-pay or the order-to-cash team, had a bit of a gap, because tax team wanted to test this many, maybe the order-to-cash or procurement teams wanted to test this many. And so there was a big gap there. And so that would have to be filled by very expensive consultants, or just with people who had to kind of give up part of their day job to do testing. And so that's what we saw on our projects time and time again. That's one of the reasons why we developed Test Suite, to automate more upstream, but then also we handle the downstream part as well, the analysis of the actual versus expected results. I think we saw our tax team struggling with having to look at documents individually and figure out if it met their expected results criteria. So we kind of build that into Test Suite as well. We do the analysis for them, so they don't have to spend the time analyzing documents and figuring out if the tax results were correct or not.
That's really critical, because in this current, for SAP customers, they have many catalysts that are driving them to upgrade their processes and invest in automation, whether it's, again, what we talked about in terms of regulation that's adding complexity, that's forcing them to optimize their indirect tax lifecycle processes, or moving to the cloud, right? Moving their tax-based processes to the cloud, or, migrating to S4HANA. And so, in researching Test Suite and having conversations with you, I was really fascinated by the flexibility that Test Suite offers with regards to implementation, supporting upgrades, supporting demos of new tax processes. Can you speak to how that that capacity is a differentiator for Test Suite versus the marketplace?
Absolutely. The thing is that testing doesn't stop after you go live. So it's one thing to save hundreds of hours or even thousands of FTE hours during an implementation. But after you go live, that system is very dynamic. There's a lot of data that changes. There's content that changes every month. And that your transaction flows have to be retested over and over again. So one of the things that we found is that companies would have the budgets maybe to do testing during an initial implementation, but after go live, found it really hard to get the resources allocated. Tax teams especially, they've got day jobs, they have to file returns, they have to manage audits. They don't really have the time to do the massive amount of testing that's needed every month to validate that rate and content changes are being applied correctly. So that's one of the beauties about Test Suite, is that you can set it to run and you can re-execute the test cases with a push of a button. And that's the nice thing, is you can not only use it during your initial deployments, but you can also use it during upgrades, during applications of OSS notes, enhancement packs, but you can also, from a month-to-month basis or even a daily basis, rerun your test cases as often as you want. And it doesn't take any additional incremental full-time equivalent resources. It's basically a program that you can hit the button and it'll create the testing for you.
That's great. I think our community is really going to benefit from a better understanding of this product. And to that end, what you've made yourself available to provide a demo for us. Can you talk about just what we'll be seeing with the demo, and before we introduce it to the community?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to give you just a little view into the screens and how it works. I'm going to kind of walk you through a sample test script that you would sort of load into it, a test with very skeletal data criteria points. Load that into Test Suite. I'm going to show you how it will then go and mine the documents and find what we call source documents. And this is either a document that's already been created in the environment that you can use as a model, or if it doesn't find one, it can actually go and find the SAP data, piece it together, and sort of pre-validate your data combinations to make sure that this test data is going to work together. From there, I'm going to show you how it executes and runs, and it does it in a couple of modes. And then from there, I'm going to show you how you can look at results and see both your failures and your pass results as well, and have a nice report that will capture all of that for ongoing documentation needs.
Okay, and before we start the demo, just can you give us an idea of what this would look like manually, if in terms of the demo that you're presenting, where you're showing the automation, what would that represent manually for an organization versus what we'll see on the demo in terms of automation?
Yeah, the demo I show you is literally just over a few minutes. So it does truncate things, but it really doesn't take long for Test Suite to go and find data, execute the test case, and show you the results. It's literally, when you hit the button, seconds. If you were to do that manually, the amount of time that you would have to spend either yourself or hiring a consultant to go and produce a test script for you, define all the different scenarios that you need to test, go and research in SAP, literally probably run master data table dumps in order to find data that you think are going to meet the criteria, maybe put that together into a test spreadsheet, and then have to actually log in at SAP and test that combination that you've just found is going to work. Then from there, you'll say, okay, this works. Let me hand it over to another person who can test it. And then they're going to have to go in and log in to create a purchase order. Then they'll maybe have to do a PO release, then do a goods receipt, then do an LIV invoice, and then that'll create an accounting doc. From there, you might hand that document number, put it in a big spreadsheet, send it over to the tax department. They're going to have to go and drill in and look at every single one of those documents and compare that against their own matrices of what should be taxable versus exempt, what rates to expect, what tax codes they should have expected. And then they'll probably mark a spreadsheet to say pass or fail. That process is going to take a long time from a user standpoint, not to mention any of the system errors or warnings that a user might get as they're creating documents, and that might stop them, and they may have to go and contact someone in the team to figure out why they're getting this error message. All of that can take a lot of time just to process one test case.
So what we will do now is take a look at the demo, and we will circle back with some further insight and questions. Test
Suite is a program that we developed here at Vertex to solve one of the big challenges around SAP and tax implementations, and that is the amount of time it takes for testing. So there's a lot of different components of testing, and Test Suite automates a lot of that. Everything from the building of the test script, validating the data, executing the test cases themselves, doing analysis, and then providing really good documentation of the tests that were run after the fact. So I'm going to start off with a demo of Test Suite so you can kind of see how it works here. And I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so let's just sort of begin with the different components and functions of Test Suite. First, as I mentioned, it helps you build your test scripts. So this is one of the big challenges in the area that a lot of teams struggle with, is finding the data needed for a script. So that's the first thing that Test Suite is going to do. You're going to load in a test script with very basic minimal test criteria. And then what it's going to do is help you mine your SAP data, including transactional data and your master data, in order to find test data that will meet the criteria. And doing that, it's also going to validate the SAP data combinations. One of the challenges that we always face when we're doing testing within the procure-to-pay or the order-to-cash process is finding data that matches together. So, making sure that the vendor and the purchasing org and the material and the plant all work together, that can be a really big challenge. So that's one of the things that Test Suite does, is to help you pre-validate those combinations. It's also going to go through execution. So I'm going to show you how I'll do it maybe with the purchase order through to LIV test scenarios. I'll show you how we can load in the test scripts, have it mine the data, and then actually execute the test document. So it's going to create purchase order, goods receipt, LIV, and accounting doc. Does it automatically through Test Suite. And then finally, I'll show you the analysis and how you can see in the reporting the difference between your actual and your expected results, and capturing also in this reporting some fantastic logging we have. And this includes logging around the system messages, and then also logging attached to the accelerator. For those of you who have deployed the Vertex Accelerator, very extensive logging, including the SIC and the data mapping logs. And then finally, I'll show you the end reports, which you can look at to see your test documents, the test data, the results of the testing, so that you've got a nice comprehensive database of your test runs and execution results. All right, so here what I'm going to do, I'm going to log into SAP here, and Test Suite gets installed within your SAP environment. And it's important to note this because one of the things that it does, because it's so close to the data, it mines your data, it executes the test documents. It really has to reside in SAP. So it helps you get much better leverage within your SAP data set by residing in SAP. So that's one of the key things to remember about Test Suite. When you install it in your SAP environment, you will access it through a custom menu here. And there's a couple of things you'll do. Firstly, you'll do some configuration in order to define some of your preferences and then your test script templates. And there's 3 types of templates. We can do purchase order through to LIV. We can do FI accounting documents like FI invoices. And then we can also do sales order through billing. So as you load in your test scripts, I'm going to start here with loading in a test script. And maybe before I actually do a load, I'm going to show you an example of what a test script looks like before we run it through Test Suite. So a few things that we specify on our incoming test scripts are, one is just an ID number for every test case that you're going to run. And Test Suite can create single line documents, or it can also create multiple line documents. So you can specify one document number with multiple lines. So that way you can test different things on the same document. You can also specify, just so you understand your functional description of what you're testing. And in the tax world, there are many different variables. You know, you go beyond testing just different order types. You really want to get into testing all the variables around different states and countries, different types of products and services. And so Test Suite really lets you open up the testing scope to handle all those variances. Then you can also define some expected tax results. And these are all optional, but if you do specify them in your test script, you can include things like your taxability results, T versus E. You can include your expected tax codes, both at the purchase order and at the invoice time. You can also specify expected tax rates and expected jurisdiction codes. But if you don't want to specify, you can leave it blank, totally optional. The next thing you can do is specify your data triggers. And what you do with this is you basically defining what sort of data triggers within the SAP document would meet your testing criteria. And you really only have to put the bare minimum. So in my example here, I'm specifying my company codes. I might specify some account assignment categories for some of the lines. I may specify a material group. More importantly, I might specify material group description, keywords. And this is an important thing. One of the things that Test Suite can do is mine your data to find data based on keywords. So I might have something that includes the word machinery in the description of the material group. You can do the same for your GL account, your vendors. And here I'm going to specify my ship states. So I'm testing in the US and I want to test different states' results. So what this allows me to do is to specify the bare minimum of what's going to meet my testing criteria. And you notice I've left a lot of the fields blank. And that's totally okay, because what Test Suite's going to do, it's going to take the pieces of information we feed it, and it's going to fill in the blanks, help us find the data that will meet our criteria. Okay, so this is an example of a test script. And what you can do is actually load the test script into Test Suite. So you can specify the file, the type of test case, the template, and then go and browse for the file. And I have here already a loaded test script just to save time here. And I'm going to run the test execution so you can kind of see what happens when you load this data into Test Suite. So I'm going to load this execution screen here. And what this has done is it has basically we've loaded in that data and we've mined it. And so the important thing of what Test Suite does is it takes that minimal pieces of information that we gave it, and it went and found actual data, either documents already created within SAP, or it went and found the master data to build that document in SAP to create the test data. And that way you can use this test data that's already pre-validated in order to run your test cases. So you'll see that every one of my test cases has got the vendors defined, the plants defined, material groups, everything that's needed to create the actual test document is included now already. So that's one of the cool things about mining. We go and get that data, populate it in the test script, and now it's ready for execution. So when you're ready to execute, we kind of move to the next stage of Test Suite, and this is where it will go and execute the documents. Now, if I just select a handful here, it'll attach it to an execution ID, which is date and time stamped, and it's going to run. And you'll notice in the bottom left corner here, it's just sort of running through. It's going to give a little status as it runs through each document. And it creates the documents in a couple of modes. And I'll kind of pause here and just explain. BAPI mode or BDC mode are the two main modes. BAPI mode kind of replicates if you're bringing documents in from an external interface like Ariba. And so it kind of creates the documents using BAPIs. That's one mode. The second type of mode is the BDC mode. And what this does is it creates the documents replicating as if you were going to enter them in manually. So instead of a user manually creating a purchase order with an ME21N, our BDC mode does the same thing. It kind of replicates the creation of that in the BDC mode. So as it goes through, it's going to create, in this case, purchase order, goods receipt, LIV invoice, and accounting doc. And it does it probably, in my system here, one test case every 2 or 3 seconds. So this is quite a quick program. You can run through quite a few test cases in a matter of seconds or minutes. And that's the nice thing about this, is that this will really help you reduce the amount of time you spend in test execution. And then as it's gone through and it's created the test cases, it will read the data and create the test cases, and do so creating a purchase order in BAPI mode of goods receipt. It may create invoices as well. And it does it in 2 modes, BAPI and BDC mode. And sometimes documents may not create. And so there could be reasons why documents don't create. So we have also logging that gives you some insight as to, basically it goes through all the system messages, and there may be some data setup that might be missing. So this gives you great insight into that as you're creating test cases. Will tell you exactly what happened in terms of successes, warning messages, and failures. And so this includes that logging as part of the logging feature. The other cool thing is, if you're running the Vertex Accelerator, you can click on this and go to the Vertex Accelerator logging, which gives you a really nice insight into the SIC. This will give you some insight as to what's being passed back and forth. So if you're using Vertex as your tax engine, you can see the data going out to it. You can see the results of the tax calculation and get to that directly from the Test Suite screens. You can also go to your data mapping logging, which will give you good insight into the data that's being passed to Vertex during the actual calculation. So this is excellent logging troubleshooting features that we have. And then finally, let me kind of step back and take you to the reporting. So you may want to run your reports and see your test cases as you run them over time. And this will give you great insight into running multiple test cases over and over again. And so what we see here are examples where we've run through test cases that may have failed the first 2 times, but then I've run them again and they pass 4 times after that. So this is a great way to run the Test Suite in order to take a test case, re-execute it over and over again, and you can keep tabs on exactly what happened and what test cases passed versus failed. And here we can see a number of passes, which is great. And a pass basically occurs when your expected results in terms of taxability and document creation passed. So this is when your actual and your expected results match, and then all the documents in the flow were created successfully. So that is what constitutes pass in Test Suite. So as what normally happens in testing, your testing may not be successful the first time around, quite common, but you might find that after 1 or 2 runs, you'll have success, and then now you've got a benchmark and a baseline for your ongoing regression testing. All right, so this is this kind of concludes the demo to Test Suite. Hopefully this was helpful in helping you see how the program works.
thank you for that demo. Really exciting stuff. I have one question, or I have many questions, but the first question, after reviewing the demo with you is the amount of time that organizations can save in terms of, between IT and SMEs and getting them together to collaborate on whether it be the upgrade or demoing of new tax-based automated processes seems really important. Can we talk about really, what we're seeing from maybe some of the conversations you're having with customers and what they've been able to achieve from these cost savings and reductions in time and resources?
Yeah, absolutely. The amount of time that we typically allocate to testing on a project, it could easily be 25 to 30% of the overall project budget. And so if you're dealing with a multi-country, multi-company business unit deployment, that could run hundreds, thousands of hours even in the overall project budget. So certainly the amount of time that goes into testing is quite substantial on a project. That could be a new implementation, an upgrade. And then you add on to that the time it would take to do ongoing regression testing. So, every month, let's say. And I think that the thing that I find is a common theme for most companies that I talk to about that is that while they might have the budget to allocate to testing in a new implementation, they never ever get to the amount of testing that they really want to, simply because there is not enough people to do that amount of testing. So, you might budget for 300, 400, 500 hours on testing, but you're really only going to get to a subset of the test cases you really want to get to. And so that's one of the things that I see. And then when I talk to companies about regression testing and whether or not they spend enough time on it and feel that they cover their risk with their monthly regression testing, the answer is almost universally no. They really can't get the time to allocate to the amount of regression testing that every company should be doing after any rate or content update. And I think that's what I'm seeing is quite a common thing. And that's where Test Suite will come in, because it allows you to reprocess your testing without much incremental manual effort. And I think that's one of the areas where the savings from Test Suite can be quite substantial and run into the thousands of hours easily for a company over the course of a year.
So not only can SAP customers and customers that are implementing Test Suite have cost reductions and better resource allocation, but again, they are able to use this to deploy processes faster, right? Automated, updated processes faster. And so when I think about that, some of the data that we see from our SAP community is that they really struggle with automating tax-based processes, right? That's an area of complexity for them, as well as the ability to keep up with regulatory updates, right? And incorporate those updates, whether it be tax rates, tax jurisdiction changes, content changes into their current automated processes. And so when I think about automation, in the past, there's been a conversation around the TCO reduction, but now I think with automation, there's the opportunities that organizations have moving forward to update right there and optimize their processes. Can you talk about how Test Suite organizations can really leverage Test Suite to create more robust tax processes to meet the complexities that they're facing today?
Yeah, getting back to what I said earlier, where most companies can only test a subset of what they need to. With Test Suite, you're able to test every possible combination even of your product and service line across every state that you ship into, every country that you ship into or buy from. So by being able to have extensive coverage, you're able to roll out more in terms of your, if you roll your business units into different countries, if you get registered in a new state. So it does support business expansion. And in doing so, also reduce the risk that might come about from not getting your taxes right as you expand your operations. I think that's something that every tax department worries about, and that is not getting the taxes right, not just on the sales, but also on the purchases. A lot of companies are responsible for figuring out what taxes they owe on their purchases, for example. And so if they're not able to get their tax systems tested correctly, that can be a major liability or a risk problem. But, I also want to go beyond taxes. The test suite and what it's designed to do, because it doesn't just test tax scenarios, it actually tests SAP documents. And so this then lends itself well to covering a lot of what the procure-to-pay, the MM and FI teams, and what the sales and distribution SD teams really want to be able to get to as well, and that is to have good coverage of their test documents too. So the test suite actually goes beyond just tax testing, even though we built it with tax testing in mind. That actually, because we create documents starting in SAP using SAP data, it can be leveraged for testing within those core functional teams as well.
And do you find that organizations are starting to move past just some of the initial tax-based testing into more of these core business processes, for example, P2P, order to cash, and really implement automated testing across those core processes?
Yeah, they kind of go hand in hand. The taxes come about from the core P2P and order to cash processes, and you can't buy things or sell things without taxes being factored in. So side by side, they work together, they need to work together, and they naturally need to be tested together as well.
One thought I had is that with organizations that are implementing test suite or a testing automation solution, this type of information and reporting allows them to be more holistic with their collaboration and conversation, not only, like you said, across tax-based processes, but also some of the core business processes. Are you hearing from customers that maybe they're able to have, again, more input from tax SMEs because there's more allocation for it, more time for it, more information coming from test suite, as opposed to what I've seen or I heard in the past where tax is more an afterthought? This type of implementation and solution can support a more collaborative process with tax SMEs because, like you said, taxes, product taxability is critical and ever present.
Yeah, Ogo, I think you hit it on the head there, because it is definitely a struggle on a lot of projects, and that is getting resources, right? And so we find that sometimes when we're there representing the tax team, when we're trying to get additional MM or FI resources to help us with the additional 200 test cases we want to run, that can be a bit of a challenge. And so if we can introduce Test Suite into the mix here, what it does is it allows you to exponentially increase your testing without requiring additional resources from the MM and FI teams. And I think that is a very critical benefit of this program, is that you're able to accomplish more with way less manual effort. And of course, everyone's happier, and we like to see that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that, again, when I hear some of the conversations I'm having with customers and our community, these topics are really relevant to them. So I want to thank you for really spending the time here. I have one more question, and this really speaks to more organizations and customers and our community members that are considering tax-based processes as they move to S4HANA, right? SAP S4HANA. And we see from our data that, especially within our SAP Insider Tax community, they see SAP S4HANA as an opportunity to automate tax-based processes, and that's one of the core drivers for digital tax strategy. Can you talk about just what organizations and our community could benefit from having a conversation with you and discussing tax-based or testing automation with regards to that migration and evolving and automating tax-based processes?
Yeah, S4HANA is a thing on a lot of people's minds right now. I think it's going to be a critical move for most companies in the next 5 years, let's say. So we're definitely talking to companies almost on a daily basis about what's going on with S4HANA. And yes, companies are looking for opportunities to leverage that migration to make things better. And I think that there we've been automating indirect taxes for 25, 30 years now, I think. But I still see that out there, a lot of companies still have a number of gaps around that, and they still want to find solutions that are global and find providers that can meet every part of their, not just calculation, but also compliance, analytics, being able to handle everything within the SAP environment as well. I think companies want to streamline everything and go to a vendor that provides everything. And that's what we're working on at Vertex, is that we're able to provide everything from the SAP side of things, with the Accelerator, our Plus tools, including Test Suite, and then all the Vertex products around calculation and compliance and analytics. So I think that that's what companies are looking for. They don't want to be stuck in the 90s anymore, and they don't want to be, supplementing a calculation with a lot of manual effort and a lot of struggles still with, the order to cash or procure to pay teams. And I think that that's the direction that we're taking our clients into, and S4 is the perfect opportunity to do that.
Thank you for that. I think that's all the time we have for today. But again, this has been a really exciting conversation. I know our community is really going to benefit from the insight as well as the demo. I want to thank you for joining. I want to thank Vertex for providing kind of the context behind this and allowing you to set us up with the demo. Again, I think that's going to be really great for our community, and tax-based processes and automation of tax-based processes, digital tax strategy. These are really critical topics for our community. So thank you.
Very good. My pleasure. Thanks.